This is Austin Reed broadcasting from Emergency Communications Shelter 12 somewhere beneath what used to be New York City. If you're hearing my voice, then somehow the relay towers are still functioning. Maybe you're listening from one of the refugee settlements out west. Maybe you're aboard one of the evacuation ships anchored off the Atlantic coast. Or maybe you're one of the few survivors still hiding among the ruins. Honestly, I don't know anymore. The maps don't even agree on where New York is supposed to be. What I do know is that someone needs to tell the truth, because the official reports got almost everything wrong. They say humanity survived an alien invasion. They say we fought bravely. They say we defended Earth from an extraterrestrial threat. But none of that is true. The aliens didn't come here to conquer us. And New York wasn't destroyed by an invasion. It was destroyed because we refused to listen. The disaster that erased an entire city began months before the first alien structure appeared in the sky. Back then, I was just a late-night radio host. Nothing special. For 12 years, I worked at station WNRM, broadcasting overnight news and emergency updates for the city that never sleeps. Most nights were boring. Traffic reports, weather alerts, the occasional power outage. Nothing exciting. The city was predictable, comfortably chaotic. Millions of people rushing through their lives beneath endless towers of glass and steel. Nobody imagined those towers would soon disappear forever. The first warning came from the subway system, not from scientists, not from the military, from subway workers. On March 3rd, Maintenance Supervisor Daniel Mercer filed a report about strange sounds beneath an abandoned tunnel near Lower Manhattan. At first, everyone assumed it was faulty equipment. New York's underground infrastructure is ancient. Strange noises aren't unusual. But Daniel insisted something was different. He described it as a low humming vibration. Not loud, not threatening, almost musical. The sound seemed to come from deep beneath the bedrock itself, far below any tunnel humans had ever constructed. Nobody took him seriously. The report disappeared into a stack of maintenance paperwork. Life continued for about 2 weeks. Then the dreams started. At first it sounded ridiculous. Callers began contacting my radio show during overnight broadcasts. Different people, different neighborhoods, different backgrounds. Yet they all described the same nightmare. They dreamed they were standing in Times Square. The city around them was completely silent. No traffic, no people, no lights. Above the skyscrapers hung a black geometric shape so massive it blocked out half the sky. And beneath their feet they could hear something moving underground. Something enormous. Something ancient. The callers always woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every single one. At first I thought it was some internet prank. A viral trend. The sort of nonsense that spreads online every few months. Then I had the dream myself. I remember every detail. The empty streets. The silent buildings. The giant shadow hanging above Manhattan. Most disturbing of all was the feeling. The certainty that something beneath the city was waking up. I woke at exactly 3:17 a.m. Heart pounding. Sheets soaked with sweat. The next night hundreds more people reported the same thing. Within a week thousands were having identical nightmares. Psychologists couldn't explain it. Neither could neurologists. The phenomenon spread across all 5 boroughs. Rich neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, children, adults, police officers, doctors. Everyone dreamed the same dream. And every morning the city grew a little more uneasy. The first scientist to publicly raise concerns was Dr. Evelyn Hart. She specialized in geological surveying at a university research center in Manhattan. Dr. Hart wasn't studying dreams. She was studying seismic activity. Her instruments had detected unusual vibrations beneath the island. At first, the readings resembled minor earthquakes. But the patterns were wrong. Natural earthquakes are chaotic. These vibrations were rhythmic, organized, almost deliberate, as though some enormous machine was operating beneath the city. When Dr. Hart presented her findings to city officials, she was politely ignored. New York had more immediate problems. Housing shortages, transit delays, budget concerns. Nobody wanted to hear theories about mysterious underground machines. Then the animals started leaving. I know how that sounds, but that's exactly what happened. Bird populations vanished first. Entire flocks abandoned their nesting sites. Pigeons disappeared from public squares. Seagulls left the harbor. Even rats began emerging from subway tunnels and moving north in unusual numbers. I've lived in New York my entire life. Trust me, if the rats are evacuating, you should pay attention. By early April, the situation became impossible to ignore. Power outages began affecting isolated sections of Manhattan. Electrical engineers found nothing wrong with the grid. Equipment simply stopped working. Streetlights flickered. Cell towers failed. Entire blocks would lose power for several minutes before everything returned to normal. Surveillance cameras captured strange visual distortions during the outages. Objects bending, shadows moving independently, brief flashes of impossible architecture appearing where normal buildings should have been. The footage was dismissed as corrupted data, but people were getting nervous, very nervous. The city government finally launched a formal investigation after an incident inside Grand Central Terminal. Thousands of commuters witnessed it. At 8:42 a.m. on April 17th, the main concourse experienced what officials later described as a temporary visual anomaly. Witnesses used very different language. For exactly 12 seconds, every electronic display inside the station went dark. The clock stopped. The lights flickered. Then the walls changed. Security footage showed impossible images. Ancient stone columns, massive archways, structures that looked thousands of years older than the terminal itself. Several commuters claimed they briefly saw an entirely different city occupying the same space. A city that shouldn't have existed. Then everything returned to normal. 12 seconds. That was all. 12 seconds that terrified millions. The federal government became involved soon afterward. Most of their activities remained classified. But information always leaks in a city this large. Rumors spread about drilling operations beneath Manhattan, about military personnel entering sealed subway tunnels, about strange discoveries deep below the bedrock. Nobody knew what was true until May 2nd. That's when the sky opened. I was on air when it happened. Midnight broadcast. Nothing unusual. Just reading weather updates and traffic reports. Then every phone line lit up simultaneously. Not dozens of calls. Thousands. People screaming, crying, praying, looking outside. I stepped away from the microphone and walked to the station rooftop. Half the city was already gathered in the streets. Everyone staring upward. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. The stars above Manhattan had disappeared. Not because of clouds, because something was blocking them. A shape, a silhouette, impossible in size. The object stretched across most of the night sky, perfectly black, perfectly motionless. No lights, no engines, no sound. It looked less like a spacecraft and more like a hole cut into reality itself. Then another appeared, and another, and another. Within 20 minutes, 6 colossal structures hovered above New York City, each larger than anything humanity had ever built. The military scrambled fighters immediately. Civilian aircraft were ordered to land. Emergency services activated disaster protocols. The entire world watched live broadcasts from Manhattan. Nobody knew whether the objects were hostile. Nobody knew what they wanted. But everyone understood one thing. Humanity was no longer alone. The strangest part? The structures ignored everything except New York. They didn't approach Washington, didn't move toward military bases, didn't position themselves above major governments. Only New York, only Manhattan, as though the city itself was the target, or perhaps the destination. The first communication attempt occurred 6 hours later. Air Force pilot Nathan Briggs approached the nearest structure in a reconnaissance aircraft. Millions watched through live military feeds. Briggs reported smooth black surfaces unlike any known material. No visible weapons, No windows, no openings, nothing. The object resembled an enormous floating monolith. Then his transmission cut off, just vanished. No distress call, no explosion, no wreckage. His aircraft simply disappeared. The same thing happened to the second plane, and the third. Military commanders grounded further reconnaissance missions. The objects remained perfectly still, silent, watching, waiting. By now panic had spread throughout the city. Store shelves emptied. Traffic jams stretched for miles. People tried leaving Manhattan in massive numbers. Many never made it far, because something else had begun happening underground. Sinkholes started opening across the city. Not normal sinkholes. These were perfectly circular shafts descending hundreds of feet into darkness. Some appeared in streets, others inside buildings. Several opened directly beneath subway stations. When engineers examined them, they discovered smooth artificial walls extending far below any documented infrastructure. The shafts weren't natural. Someone had built them. The question was who, and when. The answer arrived 3 days later. A drilling team working beneath Lower Manhattan broke through into a massive underground chamber. What they found changed everything. The chamber wasn't a cave. It wasn't a tunnel. It was a structure. An artificial structure buried miles beneath the city. Older than any known civilization. Larger than entire city blocks. At its center stood a machine. Nobody knew what it did. Nobody knew who built it. But according to every scientist who examined the initial scans, one fact was undeniable. The machine was active, and it was getting stronger. What nobody realized at the time was that the machine had already been transmitting a signal. For months, possibly years. A signal traveling far beyond Earth. Far beyond our solar system. A signal that had finally been answered. Because 3 hours after the discovery became classified, the alien structures moved for the first time. Every object above Manhattan rotated simultaneously. Not toward military installations. Not toward government buildings. Toward the exact coordinates of the machine beneath the city. And then humanity received its first message. The transmission appeared on every screen. Every phone. Every radio frequency. Every satellite network on Earth. Only 3 words. 3 simple words repeated in every language known to mankind. Return the core. That's all they said. Return the core. And at that moment, the entire world made the same fatal mistake. We assumed it was a threat. We had no idea it was a warning. If you're still listening, then you've already heard how the sky filled with impossible black structures and how humanity received its first message. Return the core. 3 words. 3 words that might have saved millions of lives if we'd understood what they meant. Instead, we interpreted them as a demand, an ultimatum, the opening move of an invasion. And from that moment onward, every decision we made pushed us closer to disaster. The military response began immediately. Fighter squadrons surrounded Manhattan. Naval forces moved into position off the Atlantic coast. National Guard units established checkpoints throughout the city. The government assured everyone the situation was under control. It wasn't. Nothing was under control anymore. The alien structures remained motionless above the skyline. But strange things were happening throughout Manhattan. People were losing time. I don't mean forgetting things. I mean literally losing hours. One woman entered a grocery store in Midtown at noon. Security cameras recorded her walking inside. She emerged 6 minutes later believing she'd been shopping for half an hour. The problem was that 6 minutes hadn't passed. She'd been missing for 17 hours. Medical examinations showed no signs of injury, no drug exposure, no memory gaps beyond the missing time itself. To her, only minutes had passed. Cases like hers multiplied daily. Taxi drivers, police officers, office workers. Entire groups of people vanished and reappeared with no explanation. At first, the government blamed mass hysteria. Then reality started breaking in ways that couldn't be ignored. One of the most famous incidents occurred near Central Park. Construction foreman Victor Hale was overseeing repairs when his crew discovered a section of pavement that simply didn't belong there. That sounds ridiculous now, but that's exactly what happened. The road surface changed. Without warning, modern asphalt transformed into ancient stone blocks. The alteration stretched nearly 50 feet before abruptly ending. Engineers examined the material. The stone was real, thousands of years old, yet it had appeared overnight in the middle of Manhattan. Scientists couldn't explain it. Neither could anyone else. The city was changing, slowly at first, then faster. Meanwhile, deep beneath Manhattan, the machine continued waking up. Government officials finally assembled a scientific task force led by Dr. Evelyn Hart and theoretical physicist Dr. Samuel Crane. Both had access to the underground chamber. Neither was prepared for what they found. According to classified reports released years later, the structure beneath the city extended far deeper than originally believed. The chamber wasn't simply underground. It connected to an entire network of impossible architecture stretching miles beneath Earth's crust. Massive corridors, artificial caverns, geometric structures too large to fully map. Everything centered around the machine. The core, that was the name scientists eventually gave it, because every signal coming from the alien structures seemed focused on that single object. Return the core, return the core, return the core. The message repeated endlessly. 24 hours a day, every frequency, every language, always the same words. Dr. Crane eventually managed to translate additional information hidden within the transmission. The aliens weren't sending a simple message. They were sending data, huge amounts of data, mathematical formulas, engineering diagrams, energy readings, warnings, thousands of warnings. One phrase appeared repeatedly: containment failure imminent. Unfortunately, military leadership ignored most of it. Fear was spreading too quickly. The public wanted protection. Politicians wanted action. Nobody wanted patience. Then came the first direct encounter. On May 11th, an unmanned drone finally managed to approach one of the structures without disappearing. The feed was broadcast live to military command centers around the world. For the first time, humanity saw what the objects actually looked like up close. The surface wasn't metal. It wasn't stone. It wasn't anything we recognized. The black material appeared almost liquid despite remaining perfectly solid. Shapes moved beneath the surface. Huge shapes, as though something alive existed inside. Then a section of the structure opened. Not mechanically, organically, like a flower unfolding. What emerged stunned everyone watching. The object wasn't a warship. It was a city. The opening revealed enormous internal spaces filled with towers, bridges, lights, and movement. Entire communities existed inside the structure. Millions of lights illuminated vast chambers larger than Manhattan itself. The aliens weren't hiding inside ships. They were living inside them. The drone transmitted footage for 73 seconds before its signal vanished. 73 seconds changed everything. Military analysts immediately noticed something disturbing. No weapons, no launch systems, no visible military infrastructure. The structure looked less like an invasion fleet and more like a mobile civilization. That should have raised questions. Instead, it created more fear. People assumed the aliens were transporting billions of settlers, an occupation force, an empire arriving to claim Earth. Nobody considered another possibility, that they might already be homeless. While politicians argued, the situation underground deteriorated rapidly. The core activated fully on May 14th. The event registered on seismic instruments worldwide. Every monitoring station on Earth detected the pulse. A wave of energy erupted from beneath Manhattan and spread through the planet like a heartbeat. I remember exactly where I was when it happened. On air, again, broadcasting emergency updates. The building shook. Windows rattled. Every light in the studio went dark. For 3 seconds, the entire city lost power. Then something appeared above Manhattan. At first, people thought it was an aurora. colored lights rippling through the night sky. But these weren't atmospheric phenomena. They were images, gigantic images, projected across the heavens. Cities no human had ever built. Towering structures floating above oceans. Worlds orbiting strange stars. Alien landscapes. Entire civilizations flickered across the sky like memories. Millions witnessed it. Millions recorded it. The images lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet they changed everything. For the first time, humanity understood we were dealing with something far older than ourselves. Something ancient. Something unimaginably advanced. The displays weren't random. Dr. Crane believed they were historical records. Fragments of information leaking from the core itself. The machine wasn't simply turning on. It was remembering. And every memory it released made reality a little less stable. The first neighborhood disappeared 2 days later. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just gone. An apartment complex in Lower Manhattan vanished at 2:13 a.m. Residents nearby reported seeing a bright flash. When emergency services arrived, they found an empty space where the building should have been. No rubble. No debris. No signs of destruction. Just absence. As though the structure had never existed. Nearly 400 people disappeared with it. The event triggered mass panic. Evacuation orders spread across the city. Traffic became impossible. Bridges clogged with vehicles. Tunnels filled with desperate families trying to escape. Yet the alien structures still did nothing. No attacks. No bombardments. No invasion. They simply watched. Waiting. Monitoring. Almost as though they were observing a disaster already in progress. Then Dr. Hart made the discovery that should have changed everything. Buried within the core's energy emissions was a repeating pattern. Coordinates. Not locations on Earth. Locations in time. The machine wasn't generating ordinary energy. It was affecting space and time simultaneously. That explained the missing hours. The ancient streets. The disappearing buildings. The visions. The core wasn't a power source. It was something far more dangerous. A machine capable of manipulating reality itself. When Dr. Hart presented her findings to federal authorities, the room reportedly fell silent. One official finally asked the obvious question. What happens if it fully activates? Her answer became famous later. At the time it was classified. Today everyone knows it by heart. She said, "If this machine reaches maximum output, Manhattan won't be destroyed." She paused, then added, "It will be removed." Nobody understood what she meant. Not until the following day. Because on May 17th, the sky above New York cracked open. Not metaphorically, literally. Millions watched as a glowing fracture appeared high above Manhattan. The crack stretched from horizon to horizon. Through it people could see something impossible. Another sky, another city, another version of New York. The buildings looked familiar, yet different, older, stranger. The vision lasted only 30 seconds before collapsing. But the message was clear. Reality itself was beginning to tear apart. The core was opening something. And whatever existed on the other side was getting closer. That night, the alien structures transmitted a new message. Not 3 words this time. Complete sentence. The first full communication humanity ever received from another intelligent species. The message appeared on every screen across the world. Every television. Every phone. Every computer. Every radio frequency. I remember reading it live on air. I remember the silence that followed. Because the message wasn't a threat. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a demand. It was a warning. A desperate warning. The message said, "Evacuate the city. Containment has failed." And for the first time since the structures arrived above Manhattan, I thought the aliens might actually be trying to save us. Unfortunately, almost nobody believed them. And by the time humanity finally learned the truth, New York had already begun to disappear. The evacuation of New York began on May 18th. At least that was the plan. In reality, Nobody was prepared to move 8 million people while reality itself was coming apart. The highways became parking lots within hours. Bridges locked up with abandoned vehicles. Families left cars in the middle of traffic and continued on foot. Helicopters filled the skies carrying government officials, medical teams, and anyone wealthy enough to afford private transportation. Everyone else simply ran. What made the panic worse was the fact that people could see the disaster spreading. This wasn't an invisible threat. It wasn't radiation or disease. The city was physically changing. Entire streets were becoming unrecognizable. Witnesses reported neighborhoods shifting positions overnight. Buildings appeared where parks should have been. Parks appeared where buildings should have been. Maps became useless. GPS systems failed completely. Emergency services started using paper maps again, only to discover those weren't reliable either. Nothing stayed where it was supposed to be. One of the strangest incidents occurred near Central Park. Paramedic Rachel Morgan was transporting injured civilians toward an evacuation center when her ambulance entered a section of roadway that shouldn't have existed. The road stretched through an unfamiliar district filled with massive stone towers. Not skyscrapers, something older. The architecture resembled no civilization in human history. She later described seeing thousands of lights glowing inside structures that reached into clouds that didn't belong to Earth's sky. Her ambulance drove through that city for nearly 20 minutes. When she emerged back into Manhattan, only 3 minutes had passed. 22 people witnessed it. Every witness gave nearly identical testimony. Scientists eventually reached a horrifying conclusion. The core wasn't just damaging reality. It was connecting multiple realities together. New York was becoming a crossroads. Different versions of existence were bleeding into each other. And every day the overlap became stronger. Meanwhile, the alien structures continued transmitting warnings. Dr. Samuel Crane worked around the clock attempting to decode additional information hidden within the broadcasts. Most of what he discovered never reached the public. The government feared releasing it would create even greater panic. Years later, after everything was over, the classified files became available. The truth was astonishing. The aliens had been trying to explain the core from the beginning. According to their transmissions, the machine beneath Manhattan was not a weapon. It wasn't a power source. It wasn't even intended to remain on Earth. The core was a containment system, an ancient device designed to isolate something dangerous, something capable of damaging the fabric of reality itself. Nobody knew what that something was, not even the aliens. Their records suggested the machine had been built by a civilization far older than their own, a civilization that had vanished millions of years earlier. The core had been abandoned beneath Earth after some forgotten catastrophe. For countless ages it remained dormant. Then humanity built New York directly above it. The machine slept peacefully beneath the city for centuries, until modern drilling operations accidentally damaged critical containment systems. That was why the signal began. That was why the aliens came. They weren't searching for Earth. They were searching for the core. And when they finally located it, it was already failing. The first military strike occurred on May 20th. Looking back now, I think that's the day our last chance disappeared. General Marcus Hale convinced world leaders that the alien structures represented an unacceptable threat. The argument seemed logical. The objects controlled our skies, ignored diplomatic efforts, possessed technology far beyond human understanding. Waiting felt dangerous. Action felt necessary. Fear always makes bad decisions sound reasonable. Operation Iron Horizon launched shortly before dawn. 48 advanced missiles targeted the smallest alien structure hovering above Manhattan. Military planners expected resistance, shields, countermeasures, retaliation. Instead, the object simply remained motionless. The missiles struck their target. The explosion illuminated half the city. People cheered. For a few minutes humanity believed it had won its first battle. Then the damaged structure opened. Millions watched live broadcasts. Nobody celebrated after that. The impact had torn a massive hole through the object's outer shell. Through that opening, we finally saw what existed inside. Not soldiers, not weapons, not military equipment. People. Alien people. Thousands of them. Entire residential districts stretched beyond the damaged section. Homes, schools, gardens, public gathering spaces, families. The structure wasn't a warship. It was carrying civilians. The missile strike had ripped through a populated area. Emergency sensors detected enormous casualty numbers. Nobody knew the exact figure, but later estimates suggested nearly 40,000 aliens died during the attack. The response from the remaining structures was immediate. Not violent, not aggressive. The broadcasts changed. For the first time, emotional patterns appeared within the transmission. Dr. Crane later compared them to human grief. The aliens were mourning. Every frequency filled with haunting sounds unlike anything humanity had ever heard. The closest comparison would be music. Beautiful, terrifying, heartbroken. The sounds echoed through radio systems across the planet. For 12 straight hours. Even now, decades later, recordings still make people cry. The military interpreted the event differently. They believed the broadcasts were psychological warfare. Evidence that the aliens were preparing retaliation. More attacks were authorized. More weapons deployed. And all the while, the core continued waking up beneath Manhattan. By late May, entire sections of the city had become inaccessible. Lower Manhattan experienced the worst distortions. Buildings flickered in and out of existence. Gravity behaved unpredictably. Several skyscrapers developed impossible internal geometries. People entering stairwells sometimes emerged from completely different structures miles away. Others never returned. One rescue team entered a collapsed office building searching for survivors. 23 firefighters went inside. Only 7 came back. The survivors claimed the interior contained an entire city. A city larger than Manhattan hidden inside a building that should have occupied half a block. Nobody believed them until helmet cameras were recovered. The footage remains among the most disturbing records ever captured. The firefighters weren't hallucinating. The building truly contained impossible spaces. Entire streets, parks, transit systems, all existing inside dimensions that shouldn't have fit within physical reality. The core was tearing holes between worlds faster than scientists could study them. Then Times Square disappeared. Millions witnessed it. One moment it existed. The next moment it didn't. The famous towers, the giant screens, the streets, the crowds. Everything vanished inside a sphere of white light. When the brightness faded, a perfectly circular empty space remained. No rubble, no debris, no signs of destruction, just absence. Nearly 80,000 people disappeared instantly. The event shattered public confidence. Evacuation transformed into full-scale panic. The city became a battlefield of desperation. Looting spread. Violence erupted. Emergency services collapsed. And above it all, the giant black structures watched silently from the sky. 3 days later, Dr. Hart made another discovery. This one terrified even the military. The energy output of the core was increasing exponentially. Not linearly, exponentially. Every projection produced the same conclusion. Within weeks, containment would fail completely. When that happened, Manhattan wouldn't simply disappear. The effect would spread. Brooklyn, Queens, New Jersey, Connecticut, eventually the entire eastern seaboard, possibly the entire planet. For the first time, world leaders considered cooperating with the aliens. Communication teams prepared a direct contact mission. The goal was simple: find out how to shut down the core. Unfortunately, humanity had already done something that made trust nearly impossible. We had bombed one of their cities. And the worst part was, we still hadn't learned what those structures truly were. Because the surviving aliens weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for something far more desperate. And what emerged from the damaged structure 3 nights later would change everything humanity thought it knew about the invasion. The first alien arrived in New York on June 1st. Not in a warship, not in an attack craft, in what appeared to be a rescue vehicle. The object descended through the clouds shortly after midnight and landed in an evacuation zone near Battery Park. Military forces surrounded the area within minutes. Armored vehicles, helicopters, sniper teams, thousands of nervous soldiers. The entire world watched through live news coverage. Everyone expected humanity's first face-to-face encounter with an invader. What emerged from the craft looked nothing like the monsters people had imagined. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall. Its body was thin and elongated, with proportions that seemed slightly wrong to human eyes. Not frightening exactly, just unfamiliar. Its skin appeared pale silver beneath floodlights, almost translucent in places. Large dark eyes reflected light like polished glass. Most disturbing was the way it moved. Not walking, gliding. Each motion carried an unnatural grace that made it seem almost weightless. The creature carried no visible weapons, no armor, no protection. It simply stepped forward and stopped. Then it raised one hand. The military responded by aiming several hundred rifles directly at its chest. The alien remained motionless. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Then every electronic device in the area activated simultaneously. Phones, radios, vehicle speakers, cameras. Every system began transmitting the same translated message. Please, listen. The single word echoed throughout the evacuation zone. Several soldiers later admitted that hearing it terrified them more than any threat could have. Because the voice sounded desperate. Not aggressive. Not hostile. Desperate. The alien attempted to continue. Unfortunately, panic got there first. Someone fired. To this day, nobody knows who pulled the trigger. A single shot cracked through the silence. Then hundreds followed. Automatic weapons erupted across the entire perimeter. The alien disappeared beneath a storm of gunfire. The broadcast stopped. The creature collapsed. And humanity committed its second unforgivable mistake. When scientists finally examined the body, the truth became impossible to ignore. The being wasn't a soldier. Its biological structure showed no signs of military enhancement. No combat modifications. No defensive adaptations. Nothing. It was an engineer, technician, someone sent to communicate, someone sent to help. The realization came too late, because the death triggered something beneath Manhattan. The core reacted, violently. At 3:11 a.m., every monitoring station registered an energy surge unlike anything recorded before. The machine's output increased by nearly 400%. Reality distortions spread across the city within hours. Entire blocks disappeared. Skyscrapers twisted into impossible shapes. Massive cracks appeared in the sky above Manhattan. People began seeing things that should not have existed. Ancient civilizations, future cities, unknown worlds, different versions of Earth, all bleeding together around the island. Dr. Hart compared the effect to a dam breaking. The containment systems weren't simply failing anymore. They were collapsing, and the core seemed to be accelerating the process. That was when Dr. Samuel Crane made the discovery that changed everything. Buried inside the alien transmissions was a complete archive. Thousands of years of historical records, scientific documentation, translations, emergency protocols, everything. The aliens had been trying to give us answers from the beginning. We just never listened long enough to understand them. The black structures hovering above Manhattan weren't spacecraft. At least not in the traditional sense. They were arcs, massive self-contained habitats. Entire populations lived inside them. Families, workers, scientists, children, millions of individuals. The structures weren't an invasion fleet. They were a rescue fleet. The aliens had arrived expecting to evacuate the core and repair its containment systems. Nothing more, nothing less. Their mission wasn't military. It was humanitarian. The records revealed something even more shocking. The aliens had encountered the core before, not once, multiple times, across multiple worlds. According to their archives, dozens of civilizations had accidentally discovered similar machines throughout the galaxy. Every incident ended the same way: reality collapse, dimensional instability, planetary extinction, entire star systems erased from existence. The aliens belonged to a coalition dedicated to locating and containing the devices before they activated. For thousands of years, they had traveled between worlds, preventing disasters. Earth was simply their latest emergency, and we had mistaken them for conquerors. The deeper scientists studied the archive, the worse the truth became. The core wasn't built to contain a weapon. It wasn't containing a creature. It wasn't containing energy. It was containing a place, an actual location, somewhere beyond normal reality. A region of existence so unstable that contact with ordinary space could destroy entire worlds. Nobody understood exactly what existed there. The ancient builders never explained. Every surviving record ended abruptly, as though something had happened to them before they could finish their work. One phrase appeared repeatedly throughout recovered data: the silence beyond. Nobody knew what it meant, but every reference was accompanied by warnings. Severe warnings, the kind of language civilizations use when discussing extinction. The kind of language that keeps scientists awake at night. Meanwhile, New York continued unraveling. The Statue of Liberty vanished for 6 hours before returning. Central Park transformed into a dense forest unlike anything found on Earth. Entire subway systems connected to locations that didn't exist. Some evacuees emerged from stations claiming they had walked through cities orbiting distant stars. Others reported seeing alternate versions of themselves. Different lives, different histories, different futures. Reality was becoming fluid, unstable, dangerously unpredictable. Then came the event that finally convinced world leaders the aliens had been telling the truth. A massive rupture opened above Midtown Manhattan. The crack stretched nearly 3 miles across. Unlike previous distortions, this one remained stable. For almost an hour, people could see through it, and what they saw terrified everyone. On the other side existed another city. Not New York, something older. Vast towers rose beyond the horizon. Impossible structures reached into a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations. The city appeared abandoned, silent, dead. Yet millions of lights still glowed inside empty buildings. Military analysts compared the scale to an entire planet-wide civilization. Then movement appeared, huge shadows crossing distant streets, shapes too large to identify clearly. The rupture closed before detailed observations could be made. But one thing was obvious: the core wasn't opening random portals. It was reconnecting Earth to somewhere specific, somewhere ancient, somewhere dangerous, and every hour that passed widened the connection. 3 days later, the final piece of the puzzle emerged. An alien vessel transmitted a complete visual reconstruction of the original containment event. The recording was over 2 million years old. Nobody expected it to work, yet somehow the data remained intact. Scientists watched in stunned silence. The recording showed an ancient civilization unlike anything humanity had ever imagined. Their technology dwarfed even the aliens. Entire stars were being manipulated like tools. Planets moved through space under artificial control. Reality itself appeared programmable. Then something went wrong. The footage became chaotic. Emergency evacuations, planetary collapses, cities disappearing, entire worlds swallowed by expanding fractures in space. The civilization fought desperately to stop whatever had escaped. In the end, they failed. Their solution was the core, a containment machine built around a growing wound in reality. They scattered thousands of devices throughout the galaxy and vanished soon afterward. No records explained where they went, only that they never returned. When the reconstruction ended, one final translated message appeared. A message from the aliens themselves. The words appeared on every screen across Earth. "We cannot close the wound alone. For the first time in human history, we need your help. And for the first time since the black structures appeared over Manhattan, humanity finally stopped preparing for war. Unfortunately, we were already running out of time, because something had begun emerging from the fractures. Something that wasn't a ship, wasn't a machine, and wasn't alive in any way humans understood. Whatever existed beyond the core had finally noticed Earth, and it was looking back. The first confirmed encounter happened on June 9th. Until then, every distortion had been strange, dangerous, unpredictable, but still passive. That changed when the evacuation convoy near Newark disappeared. 700 civilians, 30 military vehicles, 2 medical transports, gone. Not destroyed, gone. The convoy vanished while crossing an emergency evacuation route west of the city. Helicopters overhead recorded the entire event. The footage spread through military channels within minutes. I've seen it. I wish I hadn't. The road ahead of the convoy suddenly darkened. Not because of shadows, because reality itself seemed to lose color. The asphalt became black. The air became black. Even sunlight appeared to vanish. Then the darkness unfolded. That's the only word I can think of. Unfolded, like a piece of paper opening. A massive geometric shape emerged from somewhere beyond visible space. No engines, no movement, no sound, just appearance. The object passed directly through the convoy, and when it moved on, everything it touched had vanished. People, vehicles, equipment, every trace erased. Military analysts spent days examining the footage. Eventually they reached a disturbing conclusion. The thing wasn't attacking. Probably never noticed the convoy existed. The object appeared to be part of whatever environment existed beyond the fractures. Something crossing briefly into our reality before drifting away again. That realization terrified everyone. Because if those were merely background phenomena, nobody wanted to imagine what actual inhabitants might look like. Meanwhile, Manhattan was dying. Entire districts disappeared every day. The financial district vanished first, then sections of Midtown, then most of the East Side. Satellite imagery showed enormous gaps spreading across the island like cancer. 1 week after cooperation with the aliens finally began, nearly 40% of Manhattan no longer existed. The remaining population had fallen below 200,000. Most were emergency workers, scientists, military personnel, or people trapped by the constantly shifting geography. Dr. Hart and Dr. Crane became the center of humanity's survival effort. Working alongside alien specialists, they finally developed a complete understanding of the core. The truth was worse than anyone expected. The machine wasn't failing. It was succeeding. The core had detected catastrophic containment degradation centuries earlier. Everything happening now was part of an automated emergency response. The machine was attempting to relocate itself, and Manhattan happened to be attached. Imagine a sinking ship sealing off flooded compartments. That's essentially what the core was doing. To protect reality, it was gradually removing affected regions from normal space. Unfortunately, millions of people lived inside those regions. The machine didn't understand the difference. To it, New York was contamination, a section that needed isolation. The process could still be stopped, but only from inside, deep beneath the city. At the center of the underground network surrounding the core, there was a control structure, a place the alien archives referred to as the anchor. If the anchor could be reached, containment might be stabilized. The problem was getting there. The underground system beneath Manhattan had become completely unstable. Reality fractures filled every tunnel. Entire sections no longer obeyed physical laws. Some corridors stretched for impossible distances. Others looped endlessly. Many connected to locations that shouldn't exist. Every expedition sent underground failed to return. Still, there was no alternative. The mission was approved on June 14th. 23 individuals volunteered. Scientists, engineers, military escorts, alien specialists, the people tasked with saving the world. I interviewed several of them before departure. Most seemed calm, focused, determined. Only one looked terrified. An alien engineer named Kaler. Through translation software, someone asked him what worried him most. His answer stayed with me. He didn't say failure. He didn't say death. He didn't say the core. He said, "We are too late." Nobody wanted to hear that. The expedition entered the underground network at dawn. For the first several hours, everything went according to plan. Communication remained stable. Progress reports arrived regularly. The team descended through ancient tunnels older than human civilization. Structures appeared increasingly advanced the deeper they traveled. Walls composed of unknown materials. Machines still operating after millions of years. Entire chambers large enough to contain cities. The recordings became stranger with each transmission. One team member described standing inside a cavern where stars floated beneath his feet. Another reported seeing multiple versions of the expedition moving through neighboring corridors. Different teams, different outcomes, different realities existing side by side. The core's influence intensified closer to the center. Then communications stopped. For nearly 8 hours, nobody knew whether the mission had failed, whether the team was dead, or whether time itself had become distorted. Finally, a signal returned. Weak, broken, but understandable. The message came from Dr. Hart. Her voice sounded exhausted, terrified, amazed. She reported that the team had reached the anchor, and that everything humanity believed about the core was wrong. The control structure wasn't a machine. It was a city, an entire city built around the wound in reality. The ancient civilization hadn't created the core. They had sacrificed themselves to maintain it. Millions of individuals had remained behind to operate containment systems indefinitely, generation after generation, for countless ages, until eventually something happened. The city died. Its inhabitants vanished, leaving only automated systems behind. The anchor had been functioning alone for millions of years, until now. Then Dr. Hart said something that caused silence across every command center monitoring the mission. She said the city wasn't empty anymore. Something else lived there now. The transmission ended immediately afterward. For 6 hours, no further contact occurred. During those 6 hours, Manhattan lost another 20% of its remaining area. The Statue of Liberty vanished permanently. The Empire State Building disappeared. Most of Central Park collapsed into an expanding fracture visible from orbit. World leaders began preparing extinction contingencies. Evacuation plans expanded globally. Nobody knew whether Earth could survive. Then the expedition transmitted video. The footage remains classified in several countries even today. I've seen portions of it. I understand why. The images showed the anchor, a city larger than Manhattan itself, built around an enormous sphere suspended in darkness. The sphere was the wound, the thing the core had been containing. At first glance, it looked like a hole in space. Then viewers realized something horrifying. The darkness wasn't empty. Something was moving inside it. Massive shapes, countless shapes, watching, waiting, not trapped, observing. The expedition's cameras zoomed closer. And for the first time in human history, something inside the wound looked back. Every monitor receiving the transmission immediately malfunctioned. Several operators lost consciousness. One scientist suffered a fatal seizure. The footage cut out before analysts could determine exactly what had been seen. But the damage was done. Whatever existed beyond the wound was aware of us. And according to Kaler's final report, awareness changed everything. Because the moment contact occurred, the wound started opening faster, much faster. The aliens calculated that Earth now had less than 72 hours before complete containment collapse. 72 hours before the fracture expanded beyond Manhattan. 72 hours before the entire planet became connected to whatever existed on the other side. For the first time since this nightmare began, nobody argued. Nobody delayed. Nobody demanded more evidence. Humanity finally understood the situation. The invasion had never been the threat. The aliens had never been the threat. The real enemy had been buried beneath New York for millions of years. And now it was awake. The expedition still had one chance. One final chance. But success would require a sacrifice nobody had anticipated. Because the anchor could be stabilized. The wound could be contained. The core could be repaired. Yet the ancient systems demanded something in return. Someone would have to remain behind, forever, at the center of the containment network, holding the wound closed from the inside. And as the final hours of Manhattan ticked away, volunteers began stepping forward. Nobody expected volunteers. Not after everything humanity had endured. Not after months of panic, death, and collapsing reality. Yet within hours of the announcement, thousands stepped forward. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, pilots, ordinary civilians, people from every corner of the world. The problem wasn't finding volunteers. The problem was choosing one. According to the alien engineers, the anchor couldn't be operated by just anyone. The ancient systems required a living consciousness capable of synchronizing with containment mechanisms designed by a civilization millions of years beyond human understanding. Most candidates simply wouldn't survive the connection. The process would overwhelm the human mind, destroy it instantly. The aliens offered to provide one of their own. Several volunteered. Humanity refused. Too many of them had already died trying to save a species that kept shooting at them. The final candidate surprised everyone. Dr. Samuel Crane, the same scientist who had spent weeks deciphering alien transmissions. The same man who first proved the structures above Manhattan weren't warships. The same man who never stopped arguing that communication mattered more than fear. The compatibility tests showed something extraordinary. For reasons nobody fully understood, Crane's neurological patterns aligned almost perfectly with the anchor systems. His survival odds were still terrible, but they were better than anyone else's. When officials asked whether he understood the risks, he reportedly laughed. Then he said, "If this works, nobody will remember my name anyway." 3 hours later, the final descent began. Above ground, Manhattan was almost gone. The skyline that once defined New York existed only in fragments. A handful of towers remained scattered among expanding fractures. Entire neighborhoods had disappeared. Most of the island had become a landscape of floating debris, impossible geometry, and glowing tears in reality. The black alien structures still hovered overhead. Not as invaders, as guardians. Their populations were preparing evacuation corridors, rescue networks, emergency containment plans. Everything possible to help a world that had mistaken them for enemies. For the first time since their arrival, humans and aliens worked side by side. Unfortunately, time was running out. The wound beneath Manhattan had become visible from orbit. Astronauts aboard several stations reported seeing a massive dark sphere where most of the city used to be. A hole in existence itself, growing larger every hour. The final expedition reached the anchor shortly after midnight. This time communication remained active. The entire world listened. Every remaining network carried the transmission. For a few brief hours, humanity became a single audience. Waiting, watching, hoping. The reports coming from below were difficult to comprehend. The ancient city surrounding the wound was collapsing. Structures millions of years old were failing one after another. Containment systems flickered. Reality fractures spread through entire districts. And beyond it all loomed the wound itself. Larger than ever. More active than ever. The shapes moving within the darkness had become clearer. Nobody could identify them. Nobody wanted to. Several alien specialists compared the experience to staring directly into a predator's eyes. Not because the entities seemed hostile, because they seemed impossibly vast. The way humans might appear to insects, the way oceans appear to raindrops. The scale difference was incomprehensible. Then the wound began opening. Fast, very fast. Emergency alarms filled every channel. The containment network started shutting down. One system after another failed. The countdown toward total collapse accelerated. 72 hours became 12, then 6, then 3. The ancient machinery had reached its limits. There would be no second attempt, no backup plan, no miracle rescue. Either crane connected to the anchor immediately, or Earth died. The final moments were broadcast live. Not intentionally. Nobody remembered to stop the cameras. The world watched Dr. Samuel Crane walk alone through the center of the ancient city, toward a structure glowing with impossible light, toward machinery older than human history, toward a responsibility no individual should ever carry. His last recorded conversation wasn't with world leaders, or military commanders, or even his fellow scientists. It was with Kaler, the alien engineer who had warned they were already too late. The two stood together overlooking the wound. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Crane asked a simple question. "What happens to me?" The translator paused. Then Kaler answered honestly. "We don't know." Crane smiled. A tired smile. The kind people wear when they've already made peace with their fate. Then he stepped forward. The connection process began immediately. Energy flooded the anchor. The city shook. Reality fractured. Across the planet, instruments recorded spikes unlike anything ever measured. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened. The wound stopped expanding. The fractures froze. The distortions halted. The dark sphere beneath Manhattan stabilized for the first time in months. People around the world cheered, celebrated, cried. They thought it was over. They were wrong. The wound wasn't closing. It was being moved. That had always been the core's purpose. Not destruction, relocation, containment. The machine gathered every remaining fragment of instability around Manhattan and began pulling it inward. Buildings, streets, infrastructure. Reality itself folded toward the center. The city wasn't being destroyed. It was being taken somewhere else. Somewhere beyond ordinary existence. The process lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes that changed human history forever. Millions watched as the final remnants of Manhattan collapsed into light. The remaining skyscrapers vanished one by one. The fractures disappeared. The darkness receded. And then, New York City was gone. Not ruined. Not damaged. Gone. When satellites passed overhead hours later, they found open water where Manhattan should have been. No rubble, no ruins, no debris field, nothing. It was as though the island had never existed. The world entered a period historians later called the Quiet Years. Humanity mourned, rebuilt, adapted. The surviving alien population remained in Earth's orbit for several years, helping stabilize environmental damage and repair technological infrastructure. Many eventually settled on Earth. Others departed for distant stars. Relations between both species slowly improved. Trust returned. Not completely, but enough. Life continued. For a while. Then the reports began. Small things at first. Children drawing impossible skylines. People dreaming about streets that no longer existed. Strange radio signals appearing after midnight. Voices speaking from frequencies that should have been empty. Most incidents were dismissed. Coincidences, wishful thinking, grief, until the photographs appeared. The first image came from a deep space telescope 6 years later. Astronomers studying a distant gravitational anomaly captured something unexpected. A city, not a planet, not a station. A city, floating inside a region of distorted space. The image quality was poor, blurry, distant. Yet everyone recognized the skyline immediately. The Empire State Building, Central Park, Times Square, structures that no longer existed on Earth. New York had survived. Not entirely, not unchanged, but survived. Somehow the city existed on the other side of containment, preserved within whatever reality the core had carried away. The discovery transformed everything. Hope returned. Research accelerated. Humanity and its alien allies began searching for a way back. A path to the lost city. A way to reach the millions who vanished with it. No one knows whether they'll succeed. Maybe New York will remain beyond reach forever. Maybe the city is thriving somewhere beyond ordinary space. Maybe those who disappeared built new lives beneath unfamiliar stars. Nobody can say. What I do know is this. History remembers the event as the alien invasion of New York. That's the name you'll find in books, documentaries, school records, official archives. But history got it wrong. There was no invasion, no conquest, no occupation. The aliens didn't come to destroy us. They came to save us. And despite every mistake we made, despite every reason they had to abandon us, they stayed. The city we lost became proof of something humanity desperately needed to learn. Fear is easy. Understanding is hard. When something unknown appears in the sky, every instinct tells us to prepare for war. Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's survival. But sometimes the thing arriving from the darkness isn't an enemy. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's a helping hand. And if we're too afraid to listen, we risk losing everything. Some nights, when the atmosphere is quiet and the relay systems are working properly, strange signals still reach Earth. Soft signals, almost musical. Scientists can't fully decode them. Neither can the aliens. Yet every transmission seems to carry the same pattern, the same message, the same impossible coordinates. Coordinates that point somewhere beyond normal space, somewhere beyond the stars, somewhere beyond reality itself, to a city that vanished from Earth, a city that may still be waiting. And if those signals are what I think they are, then New York isn't gone. It's calling home.